Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Covey Wellness Center podcast. I'm your host, Sarah Covey, and I am excited to be with you again today to talk about the next right thing. And so many of you will have heard this term before. You may even know that it's popularized by Emily P. Freeman in her podcast and in her book and journal. And we're going to talk a little bit about that today as well as a super helpful resource. But someone who's really passionate on our team about this concept and all of those resources is Tanya. And Tanya is not a therapist on our team, but she is our office administrator. And she loves all things CWC. And so she's very integrated in all of the work that we're doing, and has been the single most consistent person building the center with me. So it's really exciting to have her voice here on the podcast as well, and lots of things for her to share. So we have these kinds of conversations all the time about all the things we're loving and the resources and the books we're bringing into the center and how they're helping. And we share podcasts back and forth. And so this is just an extension of the conversations that we often have here as we're working together in the center. So welcome, Tanya, to the podcast. I'm really glad you're here.
It's great to be here.
Yeah, this is so fun. So we're going to talk about this concept of the next right thing. So why don't you just start off by talking about how you discovered this idea, this concept? Where did it start for you?
Well, it started with working at the center. As you know, we have a wonderful wellness bookshop. And I took a few minutes to take a look at the book. And it was just on the cusp of summer, which I go to my trailer. So I started listening to the podcast first just to get an idea of what it was about. And it's one of those things that, you listen to a podcast and she hadn't, I went right back to the beginning of her podcast. She hadn't written the book yet. Actually, the book came from the podcast. So I started listening to that and went through quite a few years at once. And it was one of those things that I just felt like I've got to get this book because I keep referring to everything. So I grabbed the book and I grabbed the journal, and I've just been loving it ever since. I just can't wait to write in my journal. I do it on a weekly basis, kind of do a weekly review. I love the way it's set up. So that's how I got started. I was poking around the wellness bookshop.
Well, that I love that as the beginning of a story, because there's lots of people who have come in and done the same thing. They've poked around at the wellness bookshop and found some kind of a resource, and then they've told their friend about that resource, and the friend comes in to get that resource. And I love those stories because one of the reasons, we have the bookshop available is so that everybody feels welcome to come to Covey Wellness Center. You don't have to have a therapy appointment to show up.
That's right.
You can just come in and poke around and get a resource like these ones by Emily P. Freeman that can really change the way you're engaging with your own health and wellness, and maybe start you on a path to journaling and things like that. So maybe your next right thing is coming into the bookshop and if you're listening and poking around and seeing if something jumps out at you in a similar way that starts you down a path of investigating and being curious about that. So we certainly would welcome you to do that. So I'll just give a little background for me with Next Right Thing. So I love Emily P. Freeman, and we will give a shout out to her. She's most active on Instagram, and she, like everyone, has had a bit of an evolution in her work and her roles. And I think most recently is teaching and doing spiritual direction, which is a topic of interest to me. And so if you do go back in the podcast, you will see sort of how the concept of the next right thing has built, and then switching over to almost, I would call it like almost an audio devotional kind of thing. It's just her. She has an extremely soothing voice. She has a beautiful way. So it's like usually, 12 to 15 minutes ish. That comes out weekly, unless she's taking a break from it, but generally weekly. And she has a few guests here and there, but it's primarily just her walking through something related to often decision making, with that concept of our lives are built on the decisions that we make, and the next right thing leads us to the next right thing, and on that goes. And so she's built on that. And then in the midst of her doing this, I think the second Frozen movie came out.
Yes, yeah.
And there's that song in that, I think it's called The Next Right Thing or
Yeah,
something,
that's right.
right?
That's right.
And so I think that was kind of a funny moment of collision with like popular culture in this song and what Emily had been building and creating. So sometimes people get that song in their head if they have seen that movie or have kids that love that movie. So so lots of different ways in which this sort of idea is prevalent. And so
Mm-hmm.
I wonder if we could even just talk a little bit, Tanya, about like what does it mean? Like, what does it mean to think about the next right thing? Like, how would you describe that to somebody? What is that concept about?
Well, basically, it's about potentially breaking down something big, or if you're kind of stymied and you don't know which direction to go, sometimes we know what the next like little thing is, and that's what Emily talks about. And you know, her preview in her podcast is about, you know, decision fatigue, which, you know, as she started it before COVID certainly aggravated decision fatigue because we were making so many decisions and having to do
So many pivots.
so many.
Oh my
Yes.
goodness.
So,
Yes.
I mean, even in regular life without a pandemic, that can be a thing.
Mm-hmm.
And also, even if you have something big and you don't know how to move forward. So, it's
Mm-hmm.
really about that. And then just piggybacking from her, what she was saying too is that you know, all our decisions make our life, and so
Mm-hmm.
I just love the way she breaks things down that way.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think the thing I look forward to is that she simplifies different
Mm-hmm.
things about how we make decisions. And I actually wouldn't be somebody who has trouble making decisions. If anything, I sometimes make them too fast. But I do like her process and listening to, you know,
Yeah.
processes and even the simplification of things, like about
Yeah.
life acts, life parts of life.
Yeah. And I think it's refreshing in that sense because the next right thing distills everything down. And
Mm-hmm.
then you literally can just think, okay, when this decision is overwhelming, or this day is overwhelming, or these thoughts are overwhelming, I can kind of just let that settle for a second and just think, what's the next thing? And in therapy, we talk a lot about that because the overwhelm is overwhelming. That's the whole
Mm-hmm.
thing. And so if you can bring yourself sort of back into your body and think, what is the next right thing for me? That might be taking some deep breaths. It
Mm-hmm.
might be eating a sandwich. You know, it
Mm-hmm.
might be taking a break. It might be going to bed. It might be having a hard conversation. It might be sending a text. There's so many things that might be, but breaking it down, not to all the things after the next right thing, but just the
Yeah.
next one. And the idea is that if we can be in that moment and make that decision, then upon that decision, we can do the next right thing. And then the next
Mm-hmm.
right thing after that. And then from a trajectory standpoint, we're moving, if we're discerning what's right
Yes.
for us in that moment, we're going to move towards the thing ultimately, but we're not in that anticipatory anxiety, right? Which so many people are. They're like, I'm already 10 steps ahead of myself or more,
Mm-hmm.
activated in that and overwhelmed, but you can't do the thing 10 steps ahead because you have to do the one, step two, step three. And so I do think it breaks it down in manageable chunks for people. And that phrase is just something that your mind can quickly go to. Okay, wait, what's the next right thing? And there's
Yeah.
lots of tools we use. Like even you and I, Tanya, we use the Eisenhower matrix a lot, which breaks down. Okay, we've got this huge to-do list, and the
Mm-hmm.
next right thing. If you don't know what the Eisenhower matrix is, it's basically four quadrants that determines how you should handle things on your to-do list based on their urgency and their importance. And so some things you do right away, which would be your next right things because they're urgent and important. And then some of them you schedule, and some of them you delegate, and some of them you drop. And so you can look that up. There's lots of great information on that. But even that tool what we're really doing with that is determining what the next right thing is. What do we have to do next? This is the priority. And again, whether that's for self or in your work context, it's still the same concept. And I know, why don't you talk a little bit about arrows, Tanya? Because I know that's something that you also have learned from Emily P. Freeman that we've talked about as well. And I think it relates here, that idea.
Yes. So we've talked about it back and forth because we say, well, where do the arrows point? And sometimes what we're looking for is like a big answer, like, or the answer. And sometimes our answer comes in little arrows pointing a different, certain direction. And that often happens. And instead of looking for the big answer, sometimes we just need to follow those. And in tandem with that is Emily also talks about what questions are you carrying? Because sometimes we're carrying a question for quite a long time and we're not realizing it. So again, back to the journaling book, that's a great place to start writing those down. And she's got a section for that in her.
Just the questions, right? Like sometimes we think our journal has to have the answers, but you can actually journal questions, which I love. I love just capturing that. What are those stuck points? What am I looping about? What am I ruminating on? What am I curious about? Even if I don't know where to go next, I can name that question.
And in doing so, that actually makes it easier to identify the arrows because you're not holding all that in your head. And you can see it on paper that you've been carrying that particular question for a while. And then noticing that actually, I'm noticing that, say if it's a career decision, I'm noticing that I'm being gently nudged this direction, that idea.
Well, we really used that, you and I, when we were in our first location and we were trying to discern our next right thing, and moving to the location we're in now. And we had to, it was a big decision and it was a huge leap and it was risky. And so we were constantly having those conversations about, okay, well, the arrows seem to be pointing here and the arrows seem to be pointing here, and just one step at a time landed us here. And neither one of us, I don't think, could have imagined the growth that happened by following those arrows. Like,
absolutely.
I had a client come in, and if she's listening, she'll know who she is, but I won't obviously divulge who it is. But she came in the other day and she's like, remember when we were just meeting in your home office 5 years ago, and now I'm coming here, and what happened there? And the truth is, like Emily says, our decisions make our life. And so all those little next right thing decisions that I discerned, and then when I brought Tanya into it, that we discerned together, and moving forward, and now all of our team that we're discerning together as a team, that's what got us here. It wasn't one great big decision. It wasn't even one, like the biggest decision I probably had to make, which was leaving teaching to go back into school as a 39-year-old woman with 4 kids at home. That was a crazy decision. But even that decision came on the heels of like, okay, well, let me follow this arrow. Let me follow this arrow. Let me see if there's a program that I can do. Because, let me see if I can get into that program. Let me see if I can finance that program. What are my options? And that's, so we all kind of know this intuitively, that this is how our lives are built on these questions, but we don't always live in that thinking, that next right thing, moment to moment thinking. We're often ahead several things, and that's where we get stuck, right? So yeah. So I love the idea of journaling, and I believe the podcast, I don't know if it's going to be the one, I'm not sure when the podcasts are releasing in order, but I think it's the one right before this that just released on writing and mental health that Sarah Piercy and I did. I think it's just come out. And so that's another one where we go into this more specifics and more broad strokes on journaling. So if you want to delve deeper into that, by all means, go back and listen to that episode if you haven't already. But we really want to kind of like focus in on this resource that we have in the store, which is from Emily P. Freeman, the Next Right Thing Journal. And so Tanya, as somebody who has learned about that, and is using it actively, like, I would love to hear how this as sort of a guided journal practice has been helpful for you. Talk us through it, like share with us, your experiences with it.
So one of the things I like about it here is the book, and I've added little tabs for them myself. But it's a great book because it's not only recording what's happened or happening, but you also have she provides sections for a forward view too. So, and it's beautifully organized. So you can start anytime.
Right.
And she starts off with like the month ahead or the season ahead, and then the month ahead, and then you're in the month, and then you're looking at it reflectively. She's a couple of questions that she has in her podcast and in the book that I really love was what was life giving and what was life draining. And that kind of helps you funnel some of the simplicity into your life, because you can evaluate those things. What do I want more of? What do I want less of? And so I really like how it's organized that way, that it's got all the different views from the, recording what's happened in the These Are the Days section, where I don't really I reflect some personal stuff myself, but more of a factual, because sometimes we look back and we think, I don't remember doing all that or that phase of life, right? So
Yeah.
So it's kind of nice to kind of record some like monumental things in the news or your everyday life, what it looked like, and then even some thoughts. There's not a lot of space for that. So I think it's like, purposely specific. You're not going to get journaling pages and pages. But there are places where you can journal more in it as well. Like when your gratitude list, or like I said, that what's life giving, what's life draining section. But I love the part where, and I don't think that you get a lot of journal books that give you the option of being able to do, a forward view. And I really love that, because I have to say, for my own self, I've kind of pulled back from looking forward to something for fear of, it not happening. And I know that's all a thing, but it's a common thing for me. And I do like writing about it, getting me to get into the practice of that.
And I think it's good too, because it, like you say, it's really activating those three things together. So it's like, I'm looking ahead, I'm being in the present moment, I'm reflecting on the present moment. That's reflecting on what's happening. That's informing the next part. And so again, it's designed so that you jump in wherever you are. It's not dated. You date it. It's not dated like January 1st. So now you've missed it. You can't start. You can start July 12th. Like, it doesn't matter. And you use it in a really organic way, the way that it serves you. And I think sometimes journaling is so daunting, and we do have a number of resources, obviously, including the Next Right Thing journal, but some other resources as well. Like, what's coming to mind is like the Start Where You Are journals, and the ones by Lee Patel is it Melissa Lee Patel? Can't remember, but they're these beautiful design journals that, again, are giving you touch points to jump in, so that it's not just, I kind of want to journal, but like, I'm looking at a blank page and I don't know where to start. And there's different strategies for that. And this one is a brilliant one that Emily has come up with, that I believe she uses herself, and is just kind of paying that forward to those of us who are looking for a bit of that scaffolding, a bit of that structure around how to move ourselves forward, how to identify and crystallize some of those things that are important to us, like the longings of our heart, the learnings from reflections. Like, there's so much to be gleaned. And we did talk in the other podcast about writing, just about how much research there is that shows that writing and mental health are intricately linked. Like, it's a really important facet of the practice, is to name and journal. And so if you can do something that's super accessible and guided like that doesn't feel overwhelming. I think it would be like counterintuitive if the Next Right Thing journal was overwhelming.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like, it has to be accessible, because the whole concept is just the next thing, you know? And so it's really, really user-friendly that way. Can you maybe share with us, Tanya, how long you've been doing it, and maybe like an insight, if you're comfortable, that has come from that practice, like maybe a decision that you made in your own life related to using this journaling practice?
Mm-hmm. I would say that, well, I've been using it for 2 years.
Wow. Okay. 2 years.
Yeah,
I don't think
two
I knew you
years.
were doing it that long.
Yeah, yeah, two
Okay.
years. Yeah. And I like it because I'm not always an everyday journal. Actually, I heard somebody say once that they journal in a variety of different journal books for a variety of different reasons. And I love
Yes.
that idea because I do have a journal notebook that I use when I really want to like write out write out my thoughts about a situation or something like
Like
that,
a
or something
brain
I'm
dump.
really a brain dump. Yeah.
Yeah.
What I use this one for, Emily P. Freeman's Next Right Thing journal book for is I like it because I use it on a weekly basis. And I think it's kind of designed that way that you don't have to, write in it every day. Because really parts that I was mentioning earlier where you're capturing, the details, it's just basically, the week on 2 pages in like blocks. And so, as you said, it's not dated, but it's not one of those things that you have to go through and go, January 1, January 2. You're
Yeah.
doing the week view at a time. So it's very easy to fill in that way. And you can get on with things. You're not kind of spending a lot of time. You don't have to
Mm-hmm.
spend any time at all really for structuring it. And
Yeah.
then I think that I spend a little bit more time when we're changing seasons or changing months, just to sort of set that up for the next, transition that way. So
Mm-hmm.
it's a very nice journal book, I think, to start with if you don't have the practice of journaling, and
Yes.
it's a good one too if you want to. I'm actually looking at it with a view of leaving it behind for my kids and
Mm.
family to read because I think it's going to be almost like a little legacy book, if you will,
Oh, I love
just to
that.
kind of share what I was thinking at the time of whenever.
I love that distinction that you make, though, and share that, there's different writing, journaling ideas for different things. I taught a course way back in the day on, journaling as prayer. And
Mm.
it was, that was a whole separate thing. So, you know, you don't have to stay in the one lane. These different tools, just like our toolboxes in therapy, different tools for different reasons and seasons and, strategies. And so this one might be one that's more, like you're saying, creating a little bit of a legacy that people could read. It's a little bit more public, maybe, in that
Mm-hmm.
sense, right? Like you're capturing some things and you're reflecting, and then maybe some of the more personal reflections, like even thinking about the like, what is life giving, what is life draining questions in there. You might
Mm-hmm.
you might want to do some journaling in your other brain dump book before you actually fill in the sections in that book,
Mm-hmm.
because you
Yeah,
might
that's a
want
good
some
idea.
space, right? Like I got
Mm-hmm.
to kind of work that out. What has been sucking my energy this last, month or this last week or whatever it is. And then you kind of distill that down to your takeaways or to the key points that you want to put in those quadrants. So you,
Mm-hmm.
you know, there is not a one size fits all with journaling in general, but you use these tools to work for what you want to get out of them, right? And
That's
so
right.
I think one of the elements, if I understand it correctly, and you'll know better because you've been doing it for 2 years, there's the possibility of just kind of going back and reflecting, um, because you've captured it as you go along. Well, you could go back and do almost a year at a glance and look for
Mm-hmm.
themes. Like you could say, there's a theme here where I've been like I can think about a theme, not from doing this podcast or not from doing this journaling, but I've had a theme of wanting to do a podcast for several years,
Mm-hmm.
right? And if I was journaling about that and capturing that on paper, I would see that thread and it would help me crystallize what was important moving forward, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And so you would like, that's just a sort of a simple example to see like maybe there needs to be time for this in my life because it keeps coming up as something that is a consistent thread as I'm capturing my days, right? So
Mm-hmm.
I wonder if you've noticed that quality, like being able to look at a quarter, like a few months at a time or a year.
Yeah, that's the nice thing is that it's easy to go back and take a look at the year because of the different sections. It kind of brings things up a lot easier than going through, like you say, a brain dump. You have to go through quite a bit of reading to kind of glean, what those patterns are. One of
Yeah.
the things that recently came up for me is I made in kind of reading back and looking at what I've been writing about. I noticed that I'm looking for comfort. I'm
Mm,
looking to feel comfort in my life,
mm,
and for me, it was a chance to see all the ways that I do that, and then also realize that that's a need that really, for me, only God can fill. And
mm,
so, sort of, it was sort of like an aha moment that I really should be bringing that empty need of being wanting to be comfort to God to have Him
mm.
fill it, because that's really for me the only way it's going to be sustained um,
Right.
in my life. Like all these other ways are temporary.
Right. But being able to make that connection, what's the
Mm-hmm.
motivation, but maybe these other behaviors or these other things, the distilling that down to have that insight of it's comfort driven. And
Mm-hmm.
am I looking for that in places that aren't serving me well? And
That's right.
I think those insights, I mean, again, tying journaling and therapy together and the work we do is sometimes putting things down on paper, naming it, talking it out. It's the process of doing that that reveals the core belief or the core
Mm-hmm.
motivation. It's kind of like in like looking at holistic medicine. It's kind of like looking for root causes for disease or root causes for symptoms, as opposed to just managing them. It's like it allows you to go deeper and say, wait, this is an issue of displacing my need for comfort, and
Mm-hmm.
then I can address it. But I might not see that until over time I'm noticing a thread, and then, oh, right. So,
Yes.
those insights that we talk about that are really important in therapy, they can come all, like, it becomes sort of a self therapy tool, right? The
Exactly.
journaling. Mm-hmm.
Well, and like you said, in tandem with therapy, the thing that's nice about journaling is sometimes you have an appointment coming up and you're like, I don't even know what to talk about. So
Mm-hmm.
sometimes that's a good time to take a look at your journal book, see what you've been writing about, and bring that
Mm.
to your
Right.
therapy appointment. And on the heels of that, after your therapy appointment, it's a great place to process that appointment and the next steps that you come out of your therapy session
Yeah.
for, and see and sort of track that. And then you be able to have like a record in a sense
Mm.
of for the next therapy session, say,
Yeah.
we talked about this. I've been paying attention to that all this week and I've noticed this. You record that so you have a recollection of it in your
Yeah.
therapy appointment, and then away you go. So it's very much, it's very much something I do. I have a therapy journal, no surprise, that I
Yeah.
use.
Yeah. I love that. I think it because it's very empowering, right? So I love what you're saying. It helps you prepare and really maximize maybe how you're spending that therapy session, but
Yeah.
also how you're processing after the therapy session. And so it sort of expands the work. So you're doing all this
Mm-hmm.
good work in your therapy session, but you can continue that between sessions. And
Yes.
we have lots of people who, start coming to us when they're in a crisis, and sort of in an acute situation where maybe they're coming weekly initially. That's very common. And then over time, they start to make gains and make changes, and there's sort of a gradual release of that. Maybe it's bi-weekly, then every 3 or 4 weeks, and so on. But there gets to be a point too where what we call it is more of like a maintenance program. Like we're not in
Mm-hmm.
acute active work with a
Yeah.
client, but they're checking in maybe every 6 to 8 weeks with their therapist, and journaling is a great way to bridge those gaps. So if
Absolutely.
they have that weekly or daily journaling practice, or even honestly, even just the week leading up to the next appointment, if it's 6 weeks, you're checking in with yourself, and then you're coming with these insights that you can then, to have a tune up, right?
Yeah.
For your mental health. And so it's really in line with that proactive, holistic idea that we have, and empowering clients to use their tools, use their skills,
Mm-hmm.
and really
Mm-hmm.
engage with that. And I think, again, there's lots of different strategies for journaling, but having one for you that's worked for 2 years, as a
Mm-hmm.
that's showing that this is, when we talk about tools that work, there's lots of tools, but you've
Yeah.
got to find your tools. And if you find one that's really good, you're going to keep doing that. It's going to be a part of your, like, you didn't do this 2 years ago because you didn't know about it, but now it's like a
Mm-hmm.
regular part
Yeah.
of your wellness routine,
Yeah. Yeah.
so I
Yeah.
love that. Yeah.
Yeah. The other thing that happened too, one of the reasons I picked up, the journaling for therapy, just to touch on that again,
Yeah.
is what I was finding in that maintenance mode. What was happening was, I would come to my session without the therapy, without journaling. I would come to the session, and I would start with whatever was going on at the time, which would be, relevant. But in terms of, maintaining maybe, like the patterns in my life, um, that wouldn't get as addressed, because it's sort of like tyranny of the urgent. This is like the most
Yeah.
pressing thing on my mind because I just got a phone call or whatever. And you don't
Right.
actually work on the things that you wanted to, in the sense of carrying through. So I
Yeah.
like the journal book for that, because it can circle you back to, okay, we can still talk about what's going on in the moment that you do need some support for, but then you get back to those things that you were wanting to work on a maintenance mode.
Right. Like bigger goals or ongoing goals.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because we all know that the 50-minute session goes by like that.
Yeah, exactly.
So, in a maintenance, but when you're only coming, even every month, when you're only coming that often, you can easily eat up 50 minutes just getting caught back up.
Yeah.
So you really can get more bang for your buck in that session, if you're
Mm-hmm.
coming prepared. Like, yes, this thing just happened in my family, and I do need to spend some time processing that, but also I have these 3 goals, and I have some updates, and I want to get your I want to share that with you, get your feedback, and help me process that to keep me moving in this way. So that, and we operate with the client being at the center, so the client can use
Mm-hmm.
whatever they want in that
Yeah.
hour.
Yeah.
Absolutely. They get to decide. And if it is just unpacking the night before experience, then maybe that's exactly what needed to happen
Yeah.
that day.
Yeah.
But sometimes there'll be people in those, in that maintenance mode, where they could really glean more and keep moving ahead more productively in their own work and in their own life and in their own thinking, with just that little bit of preparation.
Mm-hmm.
And that could be as simple as doing a brain dump
Yeah.
before, because otherwise it might be the first time you're giving yourself an opportunity to have a brain dump, is when you come and see your therapist. So if
Mm-hmm.
you give yourself that opportunity prior to that meeting, then you've already had that, you've already acknowledged it, you've already kind of said those things, and then you can go to the next layer of that, right? So
Mm-hmm.
again, just thinking about what would serve me really well, and how could this help me, take a most advantage of the sessions that I'm doing. And
Yeah.
sometimes something comes up and you want to increase your sessions because you realize, wow, I've really uncovered this core issue, or this thing is
Mm-hmm.
happening in my life, and you're journaling along the way and things are ramping up, or
Yes.
you're really feeling stuck. Then you're like, I think I need to come a little more often right now. And you
Yeah.
can toggle that treatment plan for yourself because you're in touch with what's going on,
Yeah.
right?
I
So,
also like the being able to write down, just even like not long sentences, but in my sessions, just doing a quick couple of words just to remind me of something like a strategy or a tool or
mhm,
something that comes up that I can use. Because you often also walk out, thinking that was great, but then you can't hone in on the things
yes.
that were just said. So it's great. It's great for yourself in the moment and taking it with you afterward.
Yeah, we have to, of course, take clinical notes as therapists because we're required to do that. But often the things that the client wants to write down are not the same things as the clinical notes, and there might
Hmm.
be things that happen in a session, and so that you want to capture that wouldn't be captured in a clinical note, um, just because it's something that resonated with you, a phrase or a thought or a question.
Hmm.
And so we really do encourage people to bring a journal with them if they're inclined that way at all, and I
Hmm.
have clients who are like, wait, I got to write that down. And we'll
Yeah.
pause and like we write it down and we stay with it. And then I also loved, one of our therapists gave this idea where so we have a 50-minute hour and the last
Hmm.
10 minutes is dedicated to note taking. And so what she did was she encouraged her clients to also take that 10 minutes as note taking.
Mm.
So what she
Yes.
said was like, when the session's done, maybe it's just you go out to your car and sit in
Hmm.
your car for 10 minutes before you drive away. Or maybe you're an online client and you close up the screen, but you just kind of stay in that moment for
Hmm.
another 10 minutes and just capture what's coming up for you. Jot
Hmm.
down the things that are staying with you that are resonating, jot down those next steps, review that, and just let yourself stay in that moment a little bit longer and
Hmm.
capture those notes so that you don't just rush. We know we're all like, just rush off to the next
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
just that pause, and a journal will help you do that because you have a place to put that, right?
Hmm.
So you can sit with your journal and be like, okay, what were those things? And usually your therapist will do a bit of a summary. And so you'll have some things that you're percolating on. But if you just sit with kind of that session, you'll things that resonate, insights will come. And just
Hmm.
spending that same time knowing that you've set aside that hour, those 10 minutes are for note taking. Your clinician has to take those notes, but you can also take those 10 minutes and use that time to solidify what's happened in that session,
Hmm.
and take that with you. I think it's great. And the more empowered you feel to be engaged in your own work and in your own healing, it's wonderful. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
And some people are adverse to doing journal work because they think, well, what if somebody reads my book or whatever?
Mm,
And one of the things that I personally do is it's to me therapeutic to write out all my thoughts on certain things. If it's a hot topic for me and it's something I don't want anyone else to read, I just write it out and then I shred it. Like
yeah.
it's done.
Yeah. Because we talked about this a little bit in the last podcast too, but just that idea that a lot of the work, that we do with journaling for mental health is the process, not the product. So
Hmm.
it's the act of going through the writing, it's the act of naming, it's the act of dumping out those emotions and thoughts to get some clarity. And maybe you pull three or four things from that brain dump that you then maybe document somewhere or capture somewhere, or
Hmm.
send, as a secure message to your therapist. Okay, I did some journaling and I noticed these three things are coming up,
Right.
and we
Yeah.
want to pick up on that. But you don't have to feel like it has to be a polished record,
Hmm.
or something again that's going to expose your privacy, right? you
Yeah.
you want to feel like it's it's the usefulness of going through the action of putting it on paper. And
Hmm.
some people do it in a secure spot on their computer,
Hmm.
with a password protected thing in a totally separate, like I had one person who she has a totally separate Gmail account, and all of her Google Docs for that account, it's just her journaling. No one
Hmm.
has any, she doesn't really even use it for email. No one, maybe she captures a few people who are like related to that in her email there. I don't know. But it's really just to have that Google Drive that's password protected. Nobody knows it but her. And that's where she feels comfortable putting it. She doesn't want a pen and paper, journal around for people to find. I
Right.
I get that. For me,
Yeah.
I like pen to paper because it differentiates from work.
Yeah.
So I personally like the tangibility of the pen to paper, and I love journals, and I've always been a stationary person. We joke about this too, because Tanya and I are big into that. And we have these like amazing pens at Covey Wellness Center. And we have beautiful journals. And like, you know who you are. I know you're out there listening and you're like, oh yes, Tanya and Sarah are my people in this way. We don't all have to love this stuff, but we get you at Covey Wellness Center if you do. There's just something about that tangible kinesthetic act of writing on paper, you know, that for some people that's a big part of it. So again, it's not a one size fits all, but finding what works for you. And I love this conversation we're having, because we're really springboarding on so many things, but talking about this one strategy and resource that we love to promote in the store and in our work with clients, with somebody who is seeing success using it. So I just love that.
Yes.
What do you think? So one of the things that Emily P. Freeman does on her podcast, I don't know if she still does. She always do it now. She did leading up to. I don't know
when she's interviewing someone.
Yes.
She often ends with the question, "What is your next right thing?"
Yes, because she talks about. I think her tagline is something like discerning your next right thing in love.
That's right.
And so that's sort of the question, like at the end of the conversation, like, what's your next right thing? And so there's this way in which that can even be a summarizing tool in a therapy session, where you just pause. Okay, based on what we've talked about and circled around and thought about, what is the next right thing for you in this moment that's going to carry you out of this session, right? So let's talk about that. What's coming up as we just take a pause today, Tanya, for you? What's your next right thing today?
Well, on a silly note, I postponed having coffee so that my voice would be okay. So I'm going to have some of my coffee before, anyone gets hurt.
Yeah.
And then, we're going to do a little bit of work, and then I need to go out and feed my bees. My bees are out of wintering, and they need a little bit of food to keep going. So I need to go out there, and that'll be very restorative for both of us.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah. So sometimes it's, and I love that you used a quote unquote silly example, because sometimes that is actually precisely the thing.
Yeah.
The next thing I need is a cup of coffee. The next thing I need is a walk around the block. The next thing I need to do is step outside into the sunshine. And so it doesn't have to be, it's as big or as small as it needs to be for you to keep moving forward. Right. So the next right thing that comes to mind for me, well, on a higher level, I'm sort of like, yeah, I want to get back into my journaling. These last two conversations on the podcast, that is a priority for me in the coming months, is to get back into more of my writing. But I've just had this inspiration through these conversations to really find what journaling strategies are going to suit me at this point in time, in this season of my life. And so that's kind of my next right thing related to that. And then just generally, I want to go through my to-do list and decide from a work standpoint, what's the next right thing? What are the things that are those important and urgent things that have to be done next, and then let the rest go for today. So so that's where we're at. And maybe those of you who are listening, wherever you are, in your car, in your kitchen, on a walk, wherever you happen to be listening to this podcast, maybe you can just take a moment right now too and think, what is your next right thing, and see what comes up, and see if that is a discerning question for you that really helps you find your arrows and find your pathway forward. And so we offer you that. We thank Emily P. Freeman. We will, of course, give her and her resources a shout out in the podcast notes. She's really putting some amazing things out into the world. And so we highly encourage you to follow along, particularly if this concept and what we've talked about is resonating with you. She's going to be a great resource for you to track with on Instagram, through her books and her website. So we'll put those in the show notes for you to find quickly. And of course, if you want to pick up that journal and give it a try, you can start exactly where you are and pop in. Again, maybe your next right thing is just to check out what we have available for you here at Covey Wellness Center that might put you in a direction of some greater health and well-being. And that's what we're here for. So we would love to see you. If this or other podcasts are resonating with you, please do subscribe, rate us on all the places where you listen to your podcast. That just helps other people find these free resources. We just want whatever we're doing here to be in the hands of whoever needs it. Share it with a friend, somebody else who might, really resonate with what's happening. We all know that situation where we're listening along to a podcast and we think, oh, I got to tell, Tanya and I do this to each other all the time. I got to send this one to Tanya. So if you're having that prompting, please do share it. We want to make these resources as accessible as we can to as many people as we can. So we thank you for listening. Thanks, Tanya, for joining today. That was fun.
Oh, thanks for having me. This is fun. Thank you.
Okay. Well, until next time, thanks for listening in. And again, CoveyWellnessCenter.com. If you need to contact us, if you need support, you can find all the things, all the resources, everything's there. There's a contact us sheet. We make it super easy for you to reach out. So we're here for you if you need us, CoveyWellnessCenter.com. And thanks again for listening.